We play and call it work.
Hey everybody, Matthew here from MiniWarGaming.com, and as we head towards the 9th edition 40k launch, here's another video on what has changed from 8th to 9th edition. This time we're going to look at 6 things that changed in the shooting phase. Number 1, heavy weapons. For our first one, there's actually 2 important changes. First off, heavy weapons only give you a -1 to your hit rolls for moving if you are infantry. So if you're anything but infantry, usually a vehicle, you don't suffer any penalties for moving and firing heavy weapons. The other thing to point out is something we talked about in the movement video, that if any models from the unit have moved, then the entire unit has made a normal move and you will suffer the -1 to your hit rolls for having moved. Number 2, big guns never tire. Vehicle and monster lovers are going to love this new addition to 9th edition. Essentially, monsters and vehicles can shoot their ranged weapons even if within engagement range of enemy units. However, they can only fire them at the models that they're engaged with. Now, you're still allowed to declare shots at units that are not in your engagement range, and then you hope that when you resolve the shots against the ones that are in engagement range, that they are all destroyed before you make the shots at the longer range ones. Otherwise, you cannot make those shots. One other important thing though is you do get -1 to your hit rolls when firing heavy weapons at any enemy units that are in your engagement range. Number 3, look out, sir. In 8th edition, you could not target a character with 9 or less wounds unless it was the closest visible unit, excluding other characters of 9 or less wounds. Now, Lookout Sir is granted to a character who is within 3 inches of a unit of 3 or more models, or that is a vehicle or monster, as long as it is not the closest unit. Not closest visible unit, just closest unit. For example, this librarian is within 3 inches of a unit of 3 or more models. These warriors have it as its closest visible target, but these eradicators back behind this container, which are out of line of sight, are the closest enemy unit, and so they cannot fire at the librarian. Also, if the librarian just was further back, it would not be able to be targeted. In order to fire at that librarian, you'd have to have a model closer so that your unit is closer to the librarian than it is to the eradicators. An interesting situation that can come up, which will hopefully be FAQ'd, is that an aircraft is a vehicle, and this librarian is within 3 inches of a vehicle and is not the closest enemy unit, therefore would not be eligible as a target. Hopefully the FAQ will say that aircraft do not count as a vehicle that can provide Lookout Sir, because it seems kind of silly. Number 4, blast weapons. Some weapons have blast listed in their profile's abilities. Now, in the new 9th edition rulebook, they give you a big list of currently existing weapons that gain the blast trait. These are mainly weapons that used to have blast markers before. So frag missiles or frag grenades or large cannons, usually things that have D3 attacks or D6 attacks, or in the case of frag cannons, 2D6 attacks. There's a comprehensive list in the back, so there won't be any disputes, really, at least at first, unless they FAQ and change which ones are and are not blast weapons. If you have the blast ability, it gives you some additional bonuses, but also one additional restriction. First, the bonuses. When you fire a blast weapon at a unit of 6 or more models, it will always do a minimum of 3 hits. You still roll for the hits, unless it's D3 shots, in which case 3 will be your maximum. But if you roll less than 3, then you just count it as 3. So if we were to fire a frag missile or throw a frag grenade, which do D6 shots at this unit, and it had just these 10, let's drop it down to 10, so there's 6 or more, then if I rolled a 1 or a 2, it would do 3 shots. And if I roll 3 or higher, then it just does the number of shots that the profile says. If the enemy unit instead has 11 or more models, you don't even roll your number of shots. You roll maximum shots. So for a frag missile, frag grenade, you would just get 6 hits and then roll to hit for those. For the assault or frag cannons for Death Watch, you would get a maximum of 12 shots, which is crazy. But that does come with one disadvantage. That is, if you do have a blast weapon on a Leman Russ, or other vehicle or monster, this one doesn't, but just pretend that that cannon is one, you cannot fire it at enemy units within engagement range. So you can always target something outside of it and hope to destroy the units in engagement range, so you can then fire it there. Number 5, modifying hit and wound rolls. After applying all modifiers to a hit or a wound roll, that modifier cannot be better than a +1 or worse than a -1. For example, let's assume that this unit of Space Marine Tacticals had moved. They did a normal move in their previous movement phase. They want to fire at these Necron warriors who are inside of these trees. The trees have dense cover rule, which gives you a -1 to shoot anything inside or beyond them. So now, because we moved, when we go to fire that missile launcher, which has the heavy rule, we would technically have -2 to hit. -1 for moving and firing a heavy weapon, and a further -1 for firing into dense cover. But because a modifier can never be worse than -1, that -2 becomes -1. It is important to note that you need to resolve all the modifiers before determining where we're at. So for example, if you did have a +1 bonus in here from some sort of psychic power like prescience or other ability, that you would still only get back to -1 to hit. You wouldn't be like -1 for heavy, another -1 for dense cover, but oh wait, we can't have that, so we're just at -1, and then +1 to hit, so we're back to 0. So now I'm just going to hit on 3 or higher. You would instead apply all the negatives, all the positives, and then if it ended up worse than -1 or better than +1, then you would reduce it to those numbers. It's also important to note this is specific to hit and wound rolls. There is nothing about this for saving throws or any other kind of roll in the game where you cannot have worse modifiers. This is important because AP, the armor penetration of a weapon, often is more than a -1, and you don't just ignore -2 and make it -1. Number 6, allocating wounds. In 8th edition, once a model in the unit had suffered any wounds, so if they had more than one wound, you had to continue allocating wounds to that model until it was destroyed. You couldn't switch which model was receiving the wounds. That is still the case in 9th edition with one extra rule. If the model in the unit has already had wounds allocated to it this phase, you must continue to allocate wounds to it until everything's done or it is destroyed. So what we would have happen would be having mixed squads like this Assault Marine squad, where one would have a Storm Shield granting an invulnerable save. And then if you fired something like the Staff of Light from this Necron Lord, which had an armor penetration, then you would want to allocate it onto the Marine with an invulnerable save. And then once that was finished, if it stayed alive, and the Necron Warriors fired next, you would allocate those to everything else because maybe its armor penetration wasn't as good. And so you'd rather keep that alive. Well, now the moment you've allocated any wounds, and of course this is the owning player's choice, to that Storm Shield wielding Sergeant, you must continue allocating wounds to him even from any other source during that phase only. It's not through the whole player turn, it's just during that phase. This will have a big effect on mixed saved units, and against everybody else, probably not as big a deal. And those are 6 important changes to the shooting phase from 8th to 9th edition 40k. Did I miss any? Which ones do you like? Which ones do you hate? Which ones will affect your army the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And of course, stay tuned for more 9th edition coverage. Happy wargaming.
Hey there folks, thanks for tuning in to this video. Be sure to check out Josh and myself in the MiniWarGaming vaults playing some Death Guard versus Imperial Knights. This is House Mortan by Josh against the Poxmongers, the 5th Plague Company played by Luca, and the Death Guard. If you want to check this game out, you can click on the link down below and get yourself a 7-day free trial. And after that game, you can check out the rest of the 9th edition content we have pumping out right now as well. See you guys next time, and happy wargaming.